The question is, do we have any thorns in our side today? It is possible that somebody has heard a sermon on the Amalekites in the Book of Joshua and elsewhere, Numbers, where it says, if you keep them in the country, when you go to Canaan, there will be thorns in your side. Well, there are other translations that place it differently, but it all means the same. Who were these Amalekites? Now that's what's interesting. It's a great shame and disgrace and tragedy that the Book of 1 Enoch was removed from our Bibles, because the Book of 1 Enoch tells us the story about the fallen angels, as does the Book of Jyude refer to it, Peter refer to it, as does Jesus refer to it greatly in relation to his being the Son of Man. The Bible tells us Enoch walked with God, and he was not, because God took him. King James Version, which is all I know, and I don't want to look up the other translations. It meant he was translated to heaven, didn't die. Only two people have been translated like that. Elijah wasn't translated like that. It was different. But there was a woman, Thecla, who ministered with Paul and became a follower of Jesus through listening to Paul. She was translated. If you want to know her story, you should buy the story of Paul and Thecla, particularly the small one by Joseph Lumpkin, a Baptist scholar. Now we all know about Nimrod. Well, that's if we read our Bibles. How that Nimrod founded the city of Babel, and how God destroyed their structure. But he was a giant. What's a giant? A giant is somebody who was a descendant of a fallen angel and a woman on earth. There was a whole race of them, and I think in spirit they still exist today in a person without the person being a giant. Now if you turn in your Septuagint to Genesis 14:5, well, I have the Septuagint of UK and the Septuagint of 1920, and in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and cut to pieces the giants in Ashtaroth. Now this is a story in relation to Abraham, how they took all the cavalry of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sorry, I'm wrong. Well, anyway, they took captive Lot, and Abraham went to fight against those kings and regained Lot. Well, when Joshua sent the 12 spies to spy out the country of Canaan, they came back and they had a favorable report. They said it's a wonderful country. You should see the grapes. It took 2 men to be able to carry one bunch. But then they said, but there are giants in the land, and we were like grasshoppers. And I think that's in Deuteronomy 2, 19, or Numbers 13. If I don't give you a correct verse, at home you can look it up in your whatever Bible you have and look for it. But I think, pretty sure it's in Numbers. Anyway, you can look it up for yourself, but it's a fact. I remember it from many years of hearing the story and reading it. There are giants in the land. I had never entered my head that the giants would be about 30 feet. I just thought, oh, maybe 6'10" or something. No, about 30 feet. If you're a grasshopper and there's somebody up there, they're pretty tall. And there was a king called Og, and he had a huge beard, and the measurements are given in the Bible. Og is his name. Now you'll find the references, Deuteronomy 2, 10 and 11, and 3:11, and Numbers 13:31 definitely there. We are not able to go up because we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Now there's a reference to the valley of the giants in the Old Testament. So these are the Nephilim, or the fallen angels' descent, and giants. The question is, do we have any thorns in our side today? Well, we think of the Pharisees. They were the thorns in the side of Jesus. They had their own oral tradition. They did not follow the law of Moses, the Pharisees and the scribes. And the reason was their ancestors had been captive in Babylon. And while they were there, they took on the culture and the paganism of Babylon. And these Pharisees and scribes at the time of Jesus followed such as an oral tradition that Jesus mentioned. He said he was against that oral tradition, of course. It was demonic. It had basically come from the fallen angels who had taught it to the likes of Nimrod, who was a giant, and he got it by descent. Now the question remains, how did the seed of the fallen angels go through the flood? Well, what about the wives of Noah's sons? And I did read somewhere that the fallen angels hid some of them. Well, I haven't looked that up to verify it, haven't had time. It's possible. Because if we look at it, nowhere in the book of Genesis does it say that the flood covered the whole earth. We all miss that. And I'm going to look into that too. Where does it say it covered the whole earth from east to west? It doesn't say so. Now, I'm not saying it didn't. But if it didn't, well, they could have hidden some of their descendants. I don't know. The thing is, they came through the flood. And they were there not necessarily by descent, but by their paganism at the time of Jesus. Because these Pharisees followed the oral tradition that was later written after the time of Jesus, of course, called the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Zohar, the Gemara. It's in existence today. And all people who follow that are following the oral tradition that was around in the days of Jesus. But of course it's been added to. How have there been thorns in our side? Well, what about the Renaissance? The Renaissance had scholars who taught Hermetism, which comes out of Egypt. It eventually found its way into the church of that day, which by then was the Roman Catholic Church, but there was also the Protestants, because they had followed the Reformation. So then King James wanted a new translation in English from what was there that came into being through the Latin Vulgate. They followed the Latin Vulgate. And those people who say they did not have not done enough research to find the truth. It followed the Latin Vulgate. And the original church New Testament, in particular, from the original Greek, had been followed by churches in different parts of Europe and possibly Asia, Eurasia, for 300 years. But then, when the Latin Vulgate came into being, many church people accepted it, but many church people would have nothing to do with it, and all the manuscripts disappeared. Now I wonder why they disappeared. So when King James had the translation done, because he wanted a better one so that he could further his ideas of the right of kings, which we learnt about at school. Now there were two people who were given charge of the translation of the King James Bible. They both were alchemists, turned other things into gold by witchcraft. Sir Francis Bacon and Flood, F-L-U-D-D. Sir Francis Bacon actually communicated with those spirits, I would call them evil spirits by now, up there somewhere, and he even wrote an alphabet of the language they used and he used. Now that's as demonic as can be. And he was in charge of the translation of the King James Bible that most people use today. No wonder we need to find a Bible that is more exact. But praise the Lord, those of us who were read in the King James Version, we found Christ, we found salvation, we knew what it was to deny worldly lusts, we knew what it was to follow Jesus. Praise the Lord for his grace, because his Spirit leads us into the truth. Nowhere in the book of Genesis does it say that the flood covered the whole earth.